All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our public webinar for the Coastal Resilience Master Plan Phase 2. I'm going to give it a minute or so to let more of the attendees just level off before we start with the actual presentation. So please just stand by for about a minute or so till we get all our attendees in, and then we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. If you're just joining us, we're just giving it a minute or so until more people are signed on and the attendee number kind of levels off. So please just stand by and we'll get started shortly. All right, it looks like the numbers have leveled off with the attendees. So we'll go ahead and kick off this public webinar on the Coastal Resilience Master Plan Phase 2. Before we get started with the presentation, just wanted to familiarize you all with the Zoom webinar if you've not used it before. For setting up your audio, if you cannot hear me right now, please click the Join Audio on the bottom right, and you can adjust your audio settings. If you need to leave the meeting at any time, on the bottom right of the bar is the Leave Meeting option. If you have any questions, there is a question and answer session at the end of the meeting. Please type those into the Q&A section. We also have the chat feature enabled. And so if you have any technical difficulties, you can't hear me, can't see the slides, or have any troubles with the webinar, please type that into the chat. We have people standing by and monitoring that chat and can assist you trying to resolve any issues that you may have. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to DCR Director Wells for a few opening remarks.
Great. Thanks, Matt, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Like Matt said, I'm Matt Wells. I have the privilege of serving as the Director of the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. We are the agency tasked with developing and updating the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I think you're all here because you understand that flooding is increasingly threatening our coastal areas, the region's economic, cultural, environmental resources. And so this is an important step for us. As we look at approaching challenges related to flood resilience, we've kind of adopted four broad guiding principles. One, that we're committed as an agency to addressing those challenges and to support addressing those challenges, that we have to address those challenges with programs that work for all impacted parts of Virginia, so both coastal and inland, that we have to address these challenges through comprehensive plans and programs that work together, and that we have to do all of this and develop all of these things with transparency and with input from the public. So we took an important step towards addressing these challenges a couple of years ago with Phase 1 of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. Phase 2, which is what we're going to talk about today, I think it builds on that foundation for a more comprehensive, hopefully beneficial document for both local governments and our impacted stakeholders and citizens. It will be a more comprehensive risk assessment, a more comprehensive inventory, a more comprehensive funding database, and really our hope is it'll communicate data-driven stories and documents to aid everyone as we all try to get our arms around this problem. So again, I just want to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank the DCR and the launch team for the work that they're going to do in walking you through this, and look forward to a good conversation. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Director Wells. So the agenda for today's presentation, first we'll discuss, with Director Wells referenced, this growing challenge that we face with flooding and coastal resilience. Next, we'll move on to what is DCR, the Virginia Department of Conservation's role in flood resilience, give you all some updates to the Coastal Resilience Master Plan in this Phase 2 effort. And then there's some information about how you can get involved and stay involved And then we have a question and answer session at the end. And then once the presentation and question and answer session is over, we do have a feedback survey that should open up on your web browser as you leave the meeting. And do ask for you to complete that survey. We will be reviewing the results. We use that to help inform the plan as well as to inform our outreach and engagement activities. So please take the extra couple minutes to complete that feedback survey. With that being said, my name is Matt Dallin, and I am the program manager for the Department of Conservation and Recreation and our Office of Resilience Planning. With me today, we have Danielle Curry, who's a resilience engineer from Stantec. And then we also have Linda Warren, who's a senior facilitator and resilience specialist with Launch Consulting. So flooding is a growing challenge in coastal Virginia. As Director said, you all are here. You've probably experienced some of these challenges. I just want to kind of get the basic terms understood so that we are all kind of trying to speak the same language here on the where flooding is coming from and the different major sources of flooding. So first, I want to talk about coastal flooding. And there are two areas circled in this graphic here. One is along the shoreline that we're dealing with tidal flooding. And this can be sunny day flooding, where we just have elevated tidal levels that are flooding our inland areas and roadways and infrastructure. And then offshore, we also have the waves that are more associated with storm surge and our large storm events that come off the coast and push our coastal tidal waters further up inland with waves and can really cause a lot of damage and impacts. Here's some images of what that type of coastal flooding looks like. So on the left, we have a picture from 2003 and Hurricane Isabel. When this hurricane came on shore, it brought the water with us, inundating our land and our assets, including cars, and some major infrastructure with that. On the right, we have a picture of sunny day flooding in Hampton, Virginia. Just on any sunny day with high tides, which we're experiencing this week, and they'll be even higher in October with our king tides, those tidal water levels, especially at high tide, are reaching up into our upland areas and to our roadways and around our buildings and causing impacts. And these sunny day flooding events are increasing as we move forward. And we've observed this increase just as we observed the increases to relative sea level rise. So that's our first major source of flooding is coastal flooding. Next on the major source of flooding that I wanted to talk about is riverine flooding. And this is when the waters in our rivers start to swell and overtake the shoreline and proceed upland because of large storm events and a lot of rain and discharges into this watershed or the drainage area for a certain river. Here's a few photos of rainfall-driven flooding as well as that riverine flooding. So on the left, we have a car that is surrounded by water as the water overtook the banks of the stream and came up. With our rainfall-driven flooding, we have water that's leaving the clouds, coming down on our land surface, and it starts to accumulate before it can make its way into our open water bodies. And this accumulation of water is flooding. And this flooding can impact our roads, our buildings, and our natural infrastructure. So those are the three major sources of flooding that we're discussing: coastal flooding, rainfall-driven flooding, and riverine flooding. So with that, now we know what the problem, and hopefully you understand the challenges that we face, but may not be as certain as to what is DCR's role in addressing flood resilience for the Commonwealth. So first, I just wanted to start with who is DCR, the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. You may best know us from our amazing state parks that we have across the Commonwealth or our natural area reserves, but we have other departments and divisions within our agency that deals with flooding. And some of those divisions are the Division of Floodplain Management. We also have a Division of Dam Safety. We have our Soil and Water Conservation Division that focuses on water quality, but that also helps us with water quantity. And then we have our Office of Resilience Planning. Our office was recently created to help administer, implement, and develop these state-led flood resilience planning efforts that we're charged with doing from direction from the General Assembly and the legislature that was passed that says we need to establish these resilience plans for the Commonwealth, and we need to keep them updated and repeat this process every 5 years. In this process, as the director mentioned earlier, we have these principles that we are trying to address with our office and these state-led flood resilience planning efforts. And in doing so, our mission through these principles is really to distribute this knowledge and information about where flooding can occur, what are the impacts of flooding, what everybody's doing, so we have a more coordinated, comprehensive approach. And we're trying to bring people together and connect dots and connect people to different resources that exist across the Commonwealth. DCR is not the only state agency actor involved in flood resilience. We also have partners in other agencies, our Department of Emergency Management, our Department of Environmental Protection, as well as others that have also working in this space. So we're working to try to coordinate our actions to have better intergovernmental solutions, also working with our regional and local governments to help develop and address these challenges that we face. We have been working for this on quite a few times, or for a long time. Phase 1 of our Coastal Resilience Master Plan was released in 2021, and now we're currently working on Phase 2 of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. Phase 2 is not yet complete, and so this presentation is not on everything that we have done, but is more to give a preview of what's coming in this plan and planning document. It's scheduled to be completed at the end of the year and released, and then we continue with implementation. We'll also be working on a statewide flood resilience master plan, and then monitoring our progress so we can adapt, and we will repeat this cycle in another 5 years to see where we've come, where we want to go, and continue to build resilience across the Commonwealth. So what is the Coastal Resilience Master Plan? It's got a lot of buzzwords in there with resilience and master plan. To boil it down to the basics, especially for what this planning document is for this phase, it is meant to be that trusted resource and a consistent basis of information that can be used across all of the coastal zone to help identify more resilient flood resilient solutions. The figure on the right shows what our coastal zone includes. It includes 57 localities that are represented by 8 regional planning district commissions or regional commissions. So not every locality included in this coastal zone is subject to coastal flooding. As I mentioned earlier, we're focusing on all major sources of flooding here. And what we're doing in this plan is providing that consistent information to help support local and regional government planning moving forward, as well as identifying those opportunities to help us try to prioritize what we need to do and what we are doing so that we can move together more efficiently and effectively to help address this large challenge that we face. As we're developing this plan, this is not a plan that DCR is just developing in a silo. We are working with our stakeholders and soliciting their input so that this plan represents this broad stakeholder collectives group, both on what is useful, how it can be used, and integrating that into the planning process. We have a technical advisory committee, which is a public body, which all of the meetings are available for the public to view, to attend, to see our meeting minutes. that we're soliciting input from a lot of our other state agencies. We have universities attending. We have non-governmental organizations. We also have local regional governments, regional planning district commissions representing the local government's interest. Beyond our technical advisory committee, we're also working with local governments, residents, and other stakeholders to both inform them about our activities and what's going to be in the plan, as well as to solicit information from them to help inform the plan development and also to help inform what we can be doing next with implementation. This flooding challenge really takes a whole community to both prepare and um, set us up to help deal with the challenge, as well as after events and afterwards to try to monitor and actually take action. Individuals can take action to help build flood resilience. Local governments can take action. State government can take action. We all need and have a part to play in trying to address the challenges that we face with flooding. So I mentioned phase one of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan was released in December of 2021. This plan really was a call to action, helped document in a consistent manner the challenge and the problems that coastal flooding can cause and that we're facing in this coastal region. Similar to this current planning effort, it was developed in a collaborative process with many organizations and stakeholders providing input. It was developed on a relatively short time frame, and due to that, we really focused on coastal flooding hazards in that effort and how those hazards can change over time with increases to sea level. We look at that coastal hazards and try to understand what are the impacts on our people, our infrastructure, both built and natural, to really understand and again provide that consistent level of information so we can take action. We also started developing an inventory of what is occurring on the local level to address the challenge, as well as what do the local governments, regional governments, and other stakeholders, not only what are they doing, but what do they want to do, but haven't been able to, and trying to understand why not. So we can understand the actions that are being taken, as well as what is the need for action. So this plan was released both as a PDF document that is available to download and read online. But in addition to the document is a Coastal Resilience Web Explorer that is an interactive website that allows you to really focus in on the types of data that are of interest to you. And I'm going to share a few slides that show some of that data from phase one. So these are some screenshots from the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer from some of the findings that we saw in phase one. Again, focused on impacts from coastal flooding. What we saw and what we've learned from this effort is that the major flooding events that we can see today, commonly termed 100-year flood or the 1% annual exceedance probability, and we're just going to call it the major flooding events. Major flooding today in 2020, in the future, due to increases in sea level rise, where we have major flooding today is where we could expect to have recurrent flooding in the future, whether that's tidal flooding or flooding every few years. This is a big shift in where our risk is, and we're not managing for this change in risk. And that's really one of the big points and calls to action from this plan is recognizing what that future flood risk is so that we can start to take appropriate action. Some of the findings from that plan, again, we focused on what are the impacts to people and how many more people could be exposed to major coastal flooding. Looking at the impacts to our buildings, not only the numbers of buildings, but what does that represent in financial terms in dollars of impacts that can accrue from these types of exposure. We also look at exposure to our critical infrastructure, whether that's our roadways and the increasing exposure that we have there, or other types of critical infrastructure. And we're also looking at our natural resources and natural infrastructure. Our tidal wetlands through increases to sea level rise, can become inundated. And unless they migrate and move upland, we could potentially lose some of those tidal wetlands that could be big impacts to the Commonwealth. In this coastal region that we're working in the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, that represents approximately 70% of Virginia's population and almost 80% of our GDP. So what happens in coastal Virginia is important to the rest of the Commonwealth because of the number of people and the economic output that's coming from this region. So, excuse me, now I'm going to move over to what is coming up with our phase 2 update. First, this isn't an effort that DCR and our staff at the Office of Resilience Planning is doing alone. We have support from contractors and consultants that are helping us with this work. Dewberry is one of those contractors. They helped with phase 1. They're also helping with phase 2 of the master plan, looking at those major sources of flooding and what those impacts are. We also have the team of Stantec and Launch helping us take that data and information and convert it into stories into our plan to help communicate that information. They've also been helping us with our engagement activities this past year. And then lastly, we also have AECOM, who's been helping us with our public outreach, helping us communicate what the state is doing and what people can expect, what resources are available. Some new innovations with this phase 2 plan really is capturing that rainfall-driven flooding, not only today, but what that rainfall-driven flooding could look like in the future with increases in precipitation. We're also building upon our phase 1 impacts analysis by trying to get more financial impacts beyond just direct dollars of impacts to buildings. We're looking at what are the local economic impacts from flooding, or what are the tax base implications from flooding and losing some of these low-lying areas and properties there. We're also trying to understand the value that the natural infrastructure provides through the different ecosystem services and benefits to try to incorporate that into looking at the costs and benefits of both inaction and different action alternatives, that those natural benefits that natural infrastructure provide should be considered when looking at alternatives as we try to develop resilient solutions. And then again, we continue to work with our technical advisory committee, making sure we're using the best available information, updated science and technologies, that we're working together across agencies as well as across levels of government. And so that is a key component, again, with the outreach and engagement to developing these plans. So we're currently working on developing the plan products. Similar to phase 1, in this phase 2 effort, we will have a PDF document that will summarize and provide our high-level key messages of both what is in the plan, what actions are taking, and what are our next steps. Supporting that document will be an updated Coastal Resilience Master Plan Web Explorer, where we're going to add, in addition to our coastal flooding, we will have all major sources of flooding. We'll have the impacts from all those major sources of flooding. We're going to have an updated projects and initiatives database, as well as an updated database of different funding and financial opportunities to help implement some of the flood resilience needs that we have. So these products are split up really into 2 components that we've been alluding to earlier. One, the flooding side. Where can it flood now and into the future? And what types of impacts can that cause so that we have information to plan with? And then also understanding how can we advance flood resilience? And that starts with knowing what is currently underway, what are the current needs, and more importantly, where are there gaps where we have a flood risk, but no identified action that's currently going on or a need in that area. So helping to build out and understanding how do we have more comprehensive solutions. From that identified need of action, we can work on how much money do we really need for flood resilience across the Commonwealth? What are the resources that exist? And then how do we address the funding and financial gaps? We're also soliciting recommendations from our technical advisory committee to understand what they think would be most beneficial for Virginia in the next few years between plans. What can our office improve in this planning process? What can the different stakeholders do to help build flood resilience across the Commonwealth? So I'm going to go back to our major sources of flooding. We showed some pictures of examples of what it looks like in real life. Just want to provide some images of what type of data we have now to plan with and that we've been working on. So we're over here in Charles City County, which is on the lower James River, a tidally influenced area. So we have exposure from tidal flooding, riverine flooding, and rainfall-driven flooding. So this is what the surface looks like, and now we've added to it coastal flooding. So this is what major coastal flooding, or the extent of major coastal flooding. This is typically similar to what's mapped with FEMA and your regulatory floodplain. You see areas that can flood during a coastal storm. I don't know about you all, but when I've experienced coastal storms, the water just doesn't move up like a tidal event. It's usually accompanied with a lot of wind and rain, and that rain falls all over the upland areas, but it's really not represented in our coastal flooding maps, nor is any of the riverine flooding. So we do have riverine flooding models that's coming from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, that helps map those regulated floodplains that consist of coastal flooding and riverine flooding. So now on this figure, we have both coastal flooding from a major flood, and then also the extents from major flooding from a riverine flood. There's still a lot of upland areas. You see that the riverine flooding extents tend to just stop, but it looks like in the topography, there's still upland water bodies and watersheds. Well, that's because there's limits of study for FEMA when they do their mapping. They don't go all the way upstream, nor are we looking over the land surface where water can accumulate. And really, that is the biggest improvement and advancement that we've been able to contribute in this plan, is to identify where it can flood when it rains. And now we have a much more comprehensive picture of our flood risk across the landscape. Now, this information allows us to plan more completely and understand where we either have constraints where there's flooding, or opportunities where there isn't flooding, or conflict between where we exist with our infrastructure and where water is, to come up with solutions. So this data is being used in our plan. It's also available to the public. This is going to be part of our Web Explorer, but the models that were used to develop these rainfall-driven flooding events, all of those models are available for download. So this really helps other levels of government in their planning efforts. They've got a great starting space for flood resilience planning, that they don't have to go out and invest in data creation. We have a baseline of data that can be used, so that more of that time is focused on the planning side and not as much time and money being spent on the data side. So this planning effort that we're undertaking with the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, it is a long-term planning project. We are looking far out into the future to understand where flooding could be, whether it's coastal, riverine, or rainfall driven, to understand what that risk represents under different scenarios, right? Looking out to the future, there is uncertainty under which the future may hold. There is no exact, the water's going to be exactly here in the future. That is unknown. And so to try to capture that uncertainty in our future conditions, we're looking at different scenarios. A high scenario, which has increased sea level rise, increased precipitation, to see where water could be under those scenarios, which are more useful for areas, individuals, infrastructure that don't have a lot of tolerance for risk, that you really just don't want any exposure to flooding because of the impacts it could have on you, your community. We also have a moderate scenario, which is a little bit lower, but still increasing over time, so we can try to understand what is the range of possibility of outcomes in the future. what are we trying to plan for, what levels of risk are acceptable, and try to identify solutions that meet these different use cases. So in this long-term planning approach and seeing where the flooding can be now and into the future, we're also looking at those impacts, right? So we have that coastal rainfall and riverine flooding. We've got multiple planning scenarios, both in time and the moderate or high scenario that has different levels of flooding in the future. And we're running that across different asset types that exist in our landscape. So some community resources, where are people, where are residential structures? We're looking at our built infrastructure, whether that's communication infrastructure, energy, roadways, and transportation. And our human structure, those are the services that we provide that really rely on a lot of our built infrastructure, whether that's our food and agriculture, it's our hospitals, emergency management, emergency services, our fire, our police. And then we're also looking at the impacts to natural infrastructure as well, to try to have a comprehensive picture of where the flooding is and a comprehensive picture of the different impacts and challenges this flooding presents now and into the future. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Danielle from Stantec to talk about some of the impacts that we're seeing.
Hey, Matt. So here is an example from phase 1 of the type of information that is available on the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer. This information is currently being updated with phase 2, but we just wanted to give a brief overview of what it looks like. So here with the flood impact information, you can see we have different types of impacts that you can see. You can see the residential population exposed in this tabular data, as well as annualized structural losses and agricultural land that's exposed. And in the Web Explorer, there's both tabular data and interactive data displayed in maps, like you can see on the right. And this is available for download, as well as using the online mapping tool. If you go to the next slide, please. So just going to briefly go through some initial findings on our hazards. So like Matt has been mentioning, it is really important to understand our hazards and where those impacts are located. We're looking at these 3 different flooding scenarios of coastal flooding, rainfall-driven flooding, and riverine flooding. Within the plan, we'll be presenting much larger findings, but I just wanted to start off with a few key takeaways that we're seeing. So as Matt mentioned earlier, coastal flooding is anticipated to increase significantly in some areas in the long term. You can see here we have highlighted that currently in a 1% annual chance flood, about 300,000 acres are impacted. Under the long-term moderate scenario, this is expected to increase to over 600,000 acres. With our rainfall-driven flooding, currently about 6% of the area is annually inundated. And in our future scenarios, this is projected to increase about 9% to about 9%. And then with riverine flooding, the plan is just focused on baseline conditions. It does not include future-looking forecasts. Overall, currently, there are more than 500,000 acres that are exposed to riverine flooding. And then one key takeaway that we see across all 3 flood hazards is that a significant portion of the land area that is impacted is natural or vegetated landscape. If you could go to the next slide, please. So once we understand the hazards, then it is important to understand the impacts on people, our buildings and roads, as well as our natural infrastructure. So just a few summary takeaways from our initial findings. First, with people, the amount of population that is exposed to our hazards is projected to increase significantly under the long-term high scenario. You see currently on an annual basis, that is a little over 14,000, and that is projected to be over 300,000. A majority of the population exposed to coastal flooding is within the Hampton Roads region, and a majority of the population exposed to rainfall flooding is within the Northern Virginia region. For our buildings and roads, again, we're seeing an increase in the amount of infrastructure that is exposed to coastal flooding. A majority of this is seen along the eastern shore. And then again, within the Northern Virginia region, we're seeing an increase in exposure to rainfall-driven flooding. And lastly, with our roadways here, under the long-term high scenario, we're seeing an increase in roadway exposure from 1% to 8%. And then lastly, with our natural infrastructure, like we mentioned, a lot of our exposed land is natural areas. Within this plan, we looked at different types of wetlands and also the impacts of flooding on those coastal natural environments. And so 2/3 of the total land area for non-shoreline assets were shown to be exposed to riverine flooding. And then also the modeling is showing that while some of our marshes will be successfully migrating in the near term, there are going to be challenges from upland infrastructure as well as accelerated sea level rise. Next slide, please. So then after understanding the hazards and the impacts, we shift into our actions. So understanding what is being done to address these hazards and impacts. So within the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer, there is an inventory of projects and initiatives, which are resilience actions. Projects are defined as activities that will lead to the implementation of on-the-ground projects, acquisition of land, or implementation of land use controls that reduce flood risks and associated impacts. And this includes various stages of projects from initial or preliminary design all the way through final design and permitting, as well as implementation. For initiatives, we're considering activities that improve coastal communities' capacity to propose, develop, and implement adaptation projects. They include actions such as engaging stakeholders through community outreach and education, improving the ability of local governments to address hazards through training of existing staff, hiring personnel, and contracting with consultants or advisors. So this inventory was developed through the planning process. So in August 2021, DCR did an initial data call to various stakeholders for their projects and initiatives. Another significant milestone was in 2023, where they launched a user portal to allow project owners to directly make updates and submit projects and initiatives to the Web Explorer. And then with phase 2, there has been kind of a renewed initiative to make sure that this is the most up-to-date information. So there has been increased stakeholder engagement and additional data calls for bulk uploads to the portal. So on the Web Explorer, you can see an example on the right of existing project information. And this is an ongoing database that can continue to be updated by communities on their projects and initiatives. And so within the plan, we are analyzing the project and initiative data to understand trends. This is really valuable to help identify opportunities for future flood resilience actions by looking at some of our gaps in existing actions and comparing that with our identified flood risk and impacts. We can then make recommendations to really take advantage of opportunities to increase flood resilience. So we have a few examples here. So on the right, this is an example of one of the trends we're looking at, which is the type of hazards that are most commonly addressed by projects. By far, most projects are currently addressing stormwater flooding. And then something else we're looking at is the type or the classification of the projects. Currently, most projects are classified as traditional structural projects. And an example of a takeaway is that this presents an opportunity to help communities understand the benefits of nature-based solutions to maybe help increase the amount of nature-based solutions in the future. In addition to looking at overall trends, we're also looking at PDC level region-wide trends. You can see in the table on the left, we have our 8 different coastal PDCs with the number of projects and initiatives, some associated cost information, and then the funding awarded. By far, a majority of the projects are located in the Hampton Roads region, followed by Plan RVA in Northern Virginia. And then some of our other PDCs, there are some additional opportunities to help develop projects and initiatives within those areas. Next slide, please. So just to quickly go through some examples of projects and initiatives that are entered within the portal and looked at in the plan. So here we have an example from Prince William County. They have implemented a flooded roadway traffic gate that uses real-time monitoring to deploy gates to keep roadway users from driving on an area that is unsafe during flood conditions. Like we mentioned earlier, stormwater flooding has been the hazard most frequently addressed by projects and initiatives. Here is an example in Fairfax County of the Kent Gardens Neighborhood Stormwater Improvement Project. This project is trying to address some neighborhood level flooding that has been impacting the community to help improve public safety and reduce erosion. And then we also have a couple examples of initiatives. So within the Eastern Shore and the Onondaga Historic Wharf Preservation and Protection Plan, they're really working to help understand what can be done to protect this important cultural and historical asset that is also an economic driver for the region. So they're developing a resilience plan to figure out what actions they can implement to help reduce impacts on this asset. And then another example of a broader and more region-wide initiative is RAFT, which is the Resilience Adaptation Feasibility Tool. This is a partnership with several universities across Virginia to help communities understand their resilience capabilities and how they can take targeted resilience action in the future. In order to do this, they have developed a scorecard that they go through this process with the communities to understand where they are currently at in terms of resilience action and where they can go in the future. So they work with the communities to really understand how they can increase their resilience capabilities in the future.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. So I talked a little earlier about some of our work with our technical advisory committee and that there will be recommendations in this plan document that's released at the end of the year. So within our full technical advisory committee, there are 4 separate subcommittees that have been divided out. They're listed on the right. We have our research, data, and innovation subcommittee that's focused on making sure we're using the best available science and methods to understand the risk, the impacts, as well as on the innovation side, what are new technologies available for different types of innovative solutions too. We have our project prioritization subcommittee also looking at the impacts of flooding, but trying to use those impacts and understanding benefits to help us have the information needed to work towards prioritizing projects. So how do you select which one would go first and trying to figure out what could a process be for that? We also have a funding subcommittee looking at what are the different opportunities that exist, whether it's funding with grants or financing with loans or other products, financial products that exist to inform us of how we build this financial strategy to help implement resilience. And then our 4th subcommittee is our outreach and coordination subcommittee, helping provide feedback on our outreach and engagement strategy that was developed for the plan, and then helping us guide us through that planning effort and help us coordinate with the different agencies, stakeholders, and government stakeholders that we have. So we're currently been engaged with our technical advisory committee to develop these recommendations on what we could be doing better in the future to help make an impact here addressing flood resilience. The next full technical advisory committee meeting is scheduled for November 13th of 2024. They will be voting on their recommendations to advance them to be included in the main body of the plan. Based on those recommendations, our Office of Resilience Planning here at DCR is going to develop a strategy of what do we need to do to actively implement these next steps, take action on some of these recommendations, and then work on monitoring what we said we were going to do, evaluating those monitoring metrics, and then adapting to understanding what's working, what's not working, and learning from that so that when we do this planning process again, it is improved and we're building on this foundation that we've set now. One example of a recommendation that we have is that our office should develop and maintain a comprehensive list of funding resources to support plan uptake and implementation of this planning document. So if you are interested and available for that meeting on November 13th, it will be live streamed. You can attend. We will also put a video recording up of that meeting, as well as meeting minutes, and all of our prior meetings are documented and available for review in the public. So just trying to tie it back all together again, we're going to be releasing this plan at the end of this year. It will consist of a PDF document that can be downloaded and viewed and read, and that's our top level summary of what we did, more importantly, the stories and information that we've learned from the flooding and the impacts, the resilience actions that are planned or underway, and our next steps moving forward. Then building off of that is our updated Web Explorer, which will have more details on the data. So where the flooding is, where the impacts are. It'll have the complete list of projects, initiatives that we have in our inventory. So if you want to see what's going on or what's planned in your neighborhood, you could look there and see. We also have updated funding opportunities. If you're a local government or a contractor or consultant supporting local, regional governments or others that are trying to implement different resilience actions, there's a list of funding opportunities that you could look at to see where can I find the money to implement the plan on our for our Web Explorer. So those are the two main products that will be coming out at the end of the year. We will be announcing those when they are released. Once they are released, we're also going to have another round of webinars that are going to speak more to those end products and what we've learned. They're anticipated to happen towards the end of December, but could also happen early January, depending on when it's released. We also will be putting this plan document out for public comment. We want to put it out and hear back from our stakeholders, individuals, and everyone in this region and elsewhere to understand, was it helpful? Do they support what we're doing? Are there areas of improvement? Where could we go next in the future, and solicit that input to help improve the process moving forward? An additional opportunity to stay involved and participate in this planning process is to submit and share your flood story. If you have an area that is repeatedly impacted by flooding or just a one-time impact by flooding, we want to know where flooding is happening across the Commonwealth, and more importantly, hear how it's impacting you personally, so we can contextualize these impacts, incorporate that into the plan. We will also be sharing this information with other state agencies. Local and regional governments will have access to this information so that they can incorporate it into their planning process. So please, we encourage you to submit your flood story. Tell us where flooding impacts you and how it impacts you. Thank you very much for your time today. We also have a quarterly newsletter that, if you want to stay up to date with what the Office of Resilience Planning is doing or will be doing, you can sign up for our newsletter using the link provided at the top of the screen. We have a web page that breaks out all our different state-led resilience planning activities and resources, and you can always reach out to us by email if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. With that, I will hand it over to Linda from Launch, who will facilitate our question and answer session.
Wonderful. Thanks, Matt. So we've heard some wonderful information about the Coastal Resilience Master Plan and flooding. And now is the time you can ask questions. If you click on the Q&A in your bar there in Zoom, you should be able to type any questions that you may have. We won't be having time to do verbal questions today, but please do enter anything you'd like answered, and then Matt will be able to speak to those. So the first question is more of a comment that we have in here, and that is about photos. And so there's a request for DCR to create a collection of photos that the public could use that would relate to flooding.
That is a great question, and that is always a challenge, finding photos for a report that you're producing. So we're always encouraged to receive photos that get submitted for us. A lot of the photos that we've used in phase 1 are off of the Virginia Sea Grant Flickr site. So we're also looking for photos as well, and try to use those publicly available resources with photo attribution in our planning document. But I think that is a great idea. With our flood stories, we are collecting photos of where flooding is impacting different individuals. I think we can look into how we could help share those photos to help others support getting the message out there and communicating the challenge that we face. So thank you for that. I would also offer, in addition to the photos, with the Web Explorer and some of the map services that you can bring into ArcGIS Online or other mapping products, there's a lot of data available to create either maps and take screenshots from the Web Explorer, or to import that data to help build your own maps for areas that you're focused on, to help share that and help communicate that information. We also have the underlying data available. So those depth grids, if you work in GIS, whether it's a polygon or it's a depth grid raster, we have a lot of this data. This data is a public resource. We want it to get out into the hands of our practitioners and the users. So if you want access to the data, please let us know. A lot of it is hosted publicly, and we can direct you to where it's publicly hosted now. We can also provide additional support if you have a specific data request, because we do want all of this information out and being used by our stakeholders.
Great. And is there a particular person to contact at DCR if you have photos?
I would reach out, use the flood.resilience@dcr.virginia.gov email account, and then we can coordinate internally with who that needs to go to.
Great. And then when it comes to wildlife, so there's a question, are there efforts to combine this effort with DOT's, Virginia DOT's Wildlife Corridor Action Plan efforts to increase wildlife connectivity and movement? And so about the nature-based infrastructure, like the culverts and bridges improvements that happen, is there a way to connect that in with the flood resilience master plan?
So connecting, I mean, we really do focus on trying to create comprehensive plans and working with our other stakeholder partners, whether it's a state agency or regional government or local government, to be aware of what others are doing, so we're not duplicating or conflicting work. So there definitely is coordination, and we're putting this data and information out so that we hope others can use it for their more specific plans, depending on their their agency's mission or their department's mission. And we also have those stakeholders involved in our technical advisory committee to help support that coordination. So we are improving our intergovernmental and interagency coordination to develop more comprehensive and efficient solutions. Incorporating everybody's information, at some point there is a stop where VDOT has their own transportation resilience plan, they have their own wildlife corridor action. We can leverage each other's things, but we are conscious not to avoid duplicating or conflicting with what others are doing.
Great. And a few of you have asked questions about the slides. So the slides will be sent out as a PDF document to everyone who's registered for the webinars. So that will be coming soon. And then, Matt, someone asked, why has Virginia chosen not to include forward-looking riverine flood data?
You know what, that is a great question. And if the data existed and was available, we would use it. So one of our principles is using best available science and data to inform this planning process. We do not have future projections for riverine flooding when we were developing this plan. So we are using the best available data that's out there, which is FEMA's riverine flooding, is what we have to use at this time. That can be a great improvement for the next plan, to understand how riverine flooding can change over time, to better understand that forward looking projection of all these major flooding sources. So if if it was available when we were doing the work, we would have used it. It just was not available for our planning effort.
And we still have time for a few more questions. One more question here is, what can localities do to connect with DCR about what they're doing and help towards the future?
That's a great question. We are trying to improve our intergovernmental coordination. We have the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer and the user portal as a way for them to let us know what activities they're either undertaking or they want to do, but may not have the financial resources or the staff capacity to do it. So that is a key tool that's open for anybody to sign up for it at a locality, enter into a project at their own time, or have their consultants enter in projects that are developed through a hazard mitigation plan or a comp plan that's related to flooding to help keep us informed. If there's additional needs through the localities, we'd ask that you reach out to us. A lot of our coordination on this plan has been through the planning district commissions, which there are 8, because trying to also build the relationships and have sustained support for 57 localities with an office of 4 is a challenge. So we've primarily communicated through the planning district commissions for them to help communicate out to the local governments. But we are here to also support the local government's needs as well. So if there is an addition of request or need, let us know. I'm not guaranteeing that we can deal with it and handle it, but at least if we're aware, we can also maybe point you to some other resources that are available. Because again, we are not the only agency working in this space. There's other agencies working in the flood resilience space. There are some different partners that exist that have different resources available. And so we can try to connect you to different resources if we're not able to meet your need.
Very good. And so there are no more questions entered here. So we'll turn right now to talk just for a moment about the follow-up here and what we'd like. If you are willing to do it, we have a very brief survey. Once you end this webinar, so at the point in time where you do click end to come out of Zoom, within your browser should pop up a survey. So please do take a moment to take that survey. If for any reason it doesn't pop up in your browser, no worries. You will be receiving an email, probably comes out tomorrow. And in that email, that thank you email for attending, there's also going to be a link to the survey, as well as when we do provide the PDF document of the presentation, there'll be a link to the survey there. So we very much appreciate any feedback that you have. Great.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. You can click the end and that will take you out of Zoom.